Right now, Big Pharma is freaking out. We're going to be talking about Tylenol, the new medication for autism. At one time, not too long ago, 1 out of 100,000 children were diagnosed with autism, and now it's 1 in 31. That's ridiculous. That is a massive spike in autism. So the opposition will say, well, autism has always been there. We just now are having better ways of diagnosing it. Well, if that was true, then you would look into every single nursing home and they would be filled with autistic people, and you don't see that. And through the research, they found an association between Tylenol and autism. But RFK never said it caused autism, but it could definitely be one of the triggering factors that can influence susceptible people to developing autism. One thing you need to know about Tylenol, it's used for fevers, it's used for headaches, it's used for pain, it's used for menstrual cramps. And you might say, well, it doesn't really have many side effects. Well, did you realize that Tylenol is the #1 leading cause of acute liver failure? Over 80,000 people every single year end up in the ER because of taking too much Tylenol unintentionally. Why? Because this chemical, acetaminophen, which actually makes up Tylenol, is in over 600 different products and depletes glutathione. And this leaves the liver without the main antioxidant, and it destroys the liver if you don't have enough glutathione. And this is why even in the emergency rooms in hospitals, they use this thing called NAC that actually boosts up your glutathione to protect the liver against this Tylenol poisoning. And the problem with NAC, as far as going into the brain to maybe help autism, there's apparently when you take it orally, it doesn't really go through the blood-brain barrier. Right now, they're doing research on different forms of NAC, which allows this glutathione to penetrate into the brain. The results aren't out yet, so we will know soon on that. But the point is, if we have a combination of things going on, let's say we have a genetic weakness that makes you vulnerable, and then someone's taking Tylenol, all of these factors together are the perfect storm to then develop into autism. And I did a video on the work from Dr. Coimbray, who is a neurologist on this, and he has seen some really good results in this area. And he recommended for children with autism to start taking silica, okay, as one of the things, because silica slowly chelates this aluminum from the brain over a period of months to a year. So why wouldn't we want to evaluate this a little bit deeper? Why wouldn't we want to look at the accumulated effects and the dosing and the timing and the compounding effect? Maybe you're taking a couple dosages without even knowing about it. Well, mainstream doesn't even want us to look at this. They don't want to make this connection because there's obviously a lot of money involved. And what RFK is saying is, why don't you just use more caution when you take this and not just go to it as a standard thing, as a preventative action? Only take it when it's needed, under a doctor's supervision, and take the least amount possible. If it creates destruction of your liver in an older person, what do you think it's doing to a small child? Now, I know one of the big reasons why parents give it to their child is because of a fever. And I just want to touch on this fever thing for a second. Because if you take a look at the purpose of a fever, and I'm not telling you not to take any medication because you have a fever, but I just want you to understand the purpose. The purpose is the body's natural immune reaction to some infection to heat up the body to the point where these microbes get cooked. It's one of the mechanisms that your body uses to overcome an infection faster. Because the problem when you take Tylenol or other things that reduce the fever or suppress a fever, the infection duration becomes longer. As much as I personally hated going through the amount of sore throats that I had and the amount of sickness that I had growing up, I'm glad I went through that because I have a much stronger immune system now. So there's a lot of ways you can deal with a fever. One of the most researched ways is just to bathe the child in lukewarm water, where you're basically allowing the water on the skin to cool off the body as it evaporates. I mean, it's so simple, and it does lower the fever. There's other things like willow bark, which is exactly where aspirin came from. Many of these medications came from nature. Vitamin D is an immune regulator. That would be very, very important to help strengthen the immune system and allow the child to get through this. Maybe you'd use a liquid of vitamin D3. And then, of course, zinc is another important thing for that immune system to strengthen and get through the infection quicker. And then, of course, you have elderberry, which is especially good for viruses. And then vitamin C, all very important in getting a child through their infection. What I did with my kids, I'm not suggesting you do this with yours, is when they got a fever, I would get them warmer. I'd give them a hot bath, stick them in bed with a lot of covers, and let them sweat. And usually within one day, they get right through it. So I'm assisting the fever. I want that fever to cook up those pathogens and get rid of them. Now, I want to shift gears a little bit to a medication that was recommended to improve the symptoms of autism. And I want to just mention that no one said this was the cure for every single type of autism. Apparently, there are multiple causes of autism, and one is a genetic component. There's actually two different genetic pieces to this puzzle. The first one I want to talk about, which is a very common genetic problem that can weaken your ability to detoxify. And it involves this gene called MTHFR. And what this gene is involved with is your ability to metabolize or use folate. And so if you have a problem with this gene, which by the way, 40% of the population does, you're more at risk, or you're more vulnerable to have a folate deficiency. And this means if you're very young and you get a fever because you have an infection, and then you take Tylenol, that alone can kind of make you more vulnerable to developing certain problems in your brain, including inflammation in the neurons, which can lead to various things like autistic symptoms. What that's going to do, it's going to create a deficiency in the brain of folate. And then now the brain can't get rid of toxins as easily. So think about 40 years ago compared to now. You have all these different types of pollution, microplastics, but you also have a much higher frequency of vaccines that are given to small children that have something in them like aluminum. You have things that are pre-exposing or weakening that child to toxins that then have a much stronger effect on that brain than someone that doesn't have that genetic weakness. Especially if you look at the randomized, double-blinded placebo controls using a certain type of folate that improved their speech and other related symptoms. And so you would consider this kind of a little subgroup that would respond. Those that have a genetic weakness involving folate. And the reason I'm even bringing this up is because there was a certain medication that was recommended for autism. Not every single case, but I will say that it's very common. And this medication is called leucovorin, which is basically a synthetic folate. And if you've seen a lot of my videos, I'm very much against synthetic vitamins, except certain ones. And I actually think this one is quite interesting because if we compare this synthetic version of folate to the natural methylfolate that I've been recommending for an average person, I really like the effects. Methylfolate, the natural version, only handles one pathway, but the synthetic folate handles multiple pathways. It's able to bypass a lot of barriers that people have with absorbing folate. If you take this medication, I would take these other cofactors as well to optimize the results, like B12, B6, B2, magnesium, zinc. In one study, They found a folate deficiency in between 56 and 75% of autistic brains. In another trial, that synthetic folate boosted the IQ 20 to 50% compared to placebo. There's one more thing RFK talked about, which answers the question of why a child could be deficient in folate in the first place. 71% of children with autism test positive for these antibodies to the receptors for folate in the brain. Vitamin D regulates the immune system. It's involved in 2,400 different genes, which means it helps you absorb more folate in general. So if you're low in vitamin D, you're going to be extra low in folate. And then I found some additional data relating to cow's milk. Now, in cow's milk, there's a lot of different proteins. And one protein that is in milk is the receptor protein for folate. And apparently, it's almost identical to a human's receptor for folate. And because it's so similar to the human receptor, now you have antibodies against your own folate receptor. Their argument is trying to get people to think that autism is just genetic and there's nothing we can do about it. But in the meantime, we know that folate is a huge piece of the puzzle, and I do highly support the use of this medication because it has minimal side effects and it has the type of folate that can penetrate this autoimmune problem that these autistic kids have. But when you start looking through this data, you'll see there's another little piece of this puzzle, and that is a genetic weakness. So there's another gene that could be affected. So they have mapped out certain genes can put you more at risk for lupus, MS, Hashimoto's. There's a tremendous amount of research out there right now that Big Pharma does not want you to look at. Their whole goal is to say science is settled. And they never really communicate from their own organizations. They use PR companies. So when you see these attacks against RFK in the news, realize that the majority of them are from Big Pharma. I'm talking about over 95% of them. They're not from actual average people. They're from Big Pharma using different PR companies and different campaigns. So when they say vaccine safety is overwhelming, how can someone even say that if regulators and pharma have financial ties? Independent research is needed. And I think probably the most important video for you to watch is the one that I did recently talking about aluminum and how to chelate it or get it out of the body using silica. And for that information, watch this video right here.